mean, we've been talking about it, the three of us and our group, for a long, long time. Just having this conversation with you guys now, again, there's more and more pieces falling together in a good way. So it's a good puzzle I have in front of me right now. Another question for you guys is, why is Scope 3 becoming more visible in regulatory frameworks? I mean, you hear different sorts of frameworks out there, but why now?
Yeah, I can give it a shot. We just talked about it a bit earlier, but the whole idea of realizing that the fuel in itself will not decarbonize the world. If we change the fuel, we will need more. And that is because that some of the biggest emitters around the world is, of course, fuel, but also raw materials like aluminum, concrete, and so on and so on. So if we only focus on scope one, it will be the direct emissions from the fuel from your own company. But everything you buy from other companies will not be accounted if you don't look at your scope 3. So you will naturally decarbonize your own organization, meaning getting away from fuel. And that can be done by batteries or electricity. So even though you equip all your equipment with batteries, there could also be smaller nearshore vessels, right, with batteries. You can basically say you have zero emissions, but you do. The electricity that you buy, remember from our definition earlier, that will be your scope through 2 emissions will need to be accounted for. But also the battery, the infrastructure, creating the batteries, the infrastructure, creating the electricity, everything else will need to be accounted for as well. And that is the true number. And if you don't expand your scope outside scope 1, you risk just going around and living in a false picture of something, while you will see that a lot of emissions will be created on land, and it might not be the same vision. So we will see a lot of frameworks that are focusing on that. You mentioned Paolo CSRD, and even though we are seeing a simplification of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the European Union, we will still see that Scope 3 will have an important reporting area there, because if we don't include it, we'll run into the issues I mentioned earlier. From investors, since we know there'll be increased reporting requirements within the next 20 years, it will be a risk not to look at it as an investor, because you can actually run into situations in 10 years where you have made an investment like in a vessel, but you don't know the risk involved with your scope 3 because you've only been looking at the fuel. So down the line, this will be an increased point for the ship owners, but also on the manufacturing side, it will be important for them also to know the carbon footprint of the suppliers' products that they buy, because they also know that they will be required to start making these product carbon footprint calculations, and that is using the materials that they buy as well. So we're seeing it, and then of course in the fuel, IMO expanding their framework now, acknowledging life cycle based fuel regulation. That means that you will also need to look at the life cycle emissions of the fuel. And remember that is the what we call well to tank emissions. So before it's being burned, that is the scope 3 emissions just for the fuels itself. But that's also being brought up now. So that's some of the perspective why it's becoming more visible.
Well, thank you for, again, a very, very thorough explanation. I'm expecting listeners to, while some of the words being used here are not new to them, it's the explanation itself, the importance in itself on our conversation today that is the driver here. And I think it's important we get the message through. So thank you for that. Now, if you were to speak directly to an ESG manager, what are the benefits of having Scope 3 data aligned through the IMEF initiative?
Well, I'm speaking with the ESG managers in my own companies, and the advantage is clear, right? Until today, Scope 3 is what a traditional shipping company or ship manager is just calculating using spend basis analysis. You just take your spending, use a certain conversion factor to calculate how much dollars turn into CO2 emissions and calculate it. This is basically creating the inconsistency that if you spend more to buy something which is less impacting in the environment, you're actually increasing your emissions. So turning and using the IMEF methodology to collect data on a transactional level, activity basis or weight basis data for each of the products, it's providing an easier job for ESG managers at the end of the year to report the Scope 3 emissions, because there would be part of the Scope 3 emission which will still be calculated spend basis, but there will be an increasing percentage of items in spend which will be calculated using the activity basis and the weight basis emission. And will be also easy to determine, to defend this data from external auditors, to integrate them in the ESG reports, having a clear distinction between what is a spend basis and what is activity basis, and possibly also showing a positive trend in the calculation year on year, which is also providing a visibility over the company commitment toward collecting and reporting on actual data. So it is basically a transformation and a progress over time, which can be shown, and the ESG managers are basically going to be on the receiving side and seeing the quality of their data they're receiving, and in consequence, the quality of the data they are reporting, which is increasing in content and quality. So definitely, I think ESG managers should be the strongest supporters of an initiative like IMEF and trying to influence supply chain in adopting it and the suppliers in adopting it.
Quick question to this one.
And I think I have a add-on here.
Okay.
I also think a very important factor here is also that we don't have maritime guidelines, right? So you can actually risk of being an ESG manager, getting an auditor in from an auditing firm that every other day is auditing 20 different types of companies. So when they go into a ship owner, start asking, they might look at boiler suits or something on equal basis on other materials or other products you buy. They might focus on something because they don't know what is important or how to make the calculations or anything like that. They might be used to different industries that have more stricter guidelines. We don't have that in the maritime industry. So what auditors typically do is they will ask, what kind of industry standards are you adhering to? If you can say you're adhering to the IMEF industry standard, the auditor have a chance to look into it. Because again, as you mentioned, Paolo, we are leveling the playing field here. Everybody can now start calculating and reporting based on the same way. But naturally, there will be a split in different types of data. As you mentioned, Paolo, there is the spend-based and the activity-based. And I think we can dive into that in another episode where we can really nerd into this, because it can get really nerdy. But the most important part is that today, many ship owners, like many other companies, are reporting using the easiest way to report and calculate based on, and that is right now spend. So they're taking the financial spend in different categories and multiplying it using different databases to get the emissions. So they'll have emission factors to multiply with. And naturally, that is good for starting base, but as we now suddenly have an IMEF standard, we now make it easy for the suppliers to also start calculating. So as you're saying, Paolo, we can now start to reinforce our data sets where it's important, and that's up to the different ship owners to figure out where it's important based on what we call hotspots. But for everything else, the bottom line is that we make it more reliable for the ESG reporting, and also we lower the risk because having industry standards to adhere to will also make you much stronger towards the auditors because you have a predefined framework that you can show you have shared with your suppliers.
Thank you for that, Rasmus. But I just have a question I got to get out here. We're talking about spend-based, we're talking about activity-based, we're talking about weight-based, and I'm sure we're going to get into this on one of our other casts here. But I'm living in a world today where prices go up. I mean, if you're using a financial spend-based calculation to figure out your emissions or carbon footprint on an item, what happens if prices start increasing? Would emissions go up, or what happens?